In 2020, one component of Biden's presidential platform was student loan forgiveness. He said in April of that year, "I'm announcing my intention to fight for two new policies. The first is lowering the Medicare eligibility age to 60, and the second is forgiving student debt for low-income and middle-class people who have attended public colleges and universities. More specifically, I propose to forgive all undergraduate tuition-related federal student debt from 2- and 4-year public colleges and universities for debt holders earning up to $125,000 a year, with appropriate phase-outs to avoid a cliff. The federal government would pay the monthly payment in lieu of the borrower until the forgivable portion of the loan was paid off." This was an extremely popular position among America's left-leaning voting population. Even though the 2020 election seems to be more about people disliking Trump than liking Biden, you could make the argument that in so much as people liked Biden, they liked him for student loan forgiveness. However, it still wouldn't come for another 2 years and change. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, famously said in 2021 that the president didn't have the power to forgive student debt. And during this period, a lot of progressives on Twitter were screaming bloody murder that Biden wasn't fulfilling any of his promises. In fact, in a few places, like expanding the IRS or finishing the border wall, Biden was doing exactly what Democrats said Trump would do. 2021 really was the year of memes about Biden's broken promises. But I can't show you any of those tweets anymore because I got banned off Twitter again. Oops. It's really hard to do a blanket search for stuff when you're not logged into a functioning account. That's okay though. I trust that you've seen the progs screeching about how Biden's reneged on his promises. Well, screech no longer. Biden announced last week that student loan relief was coming, and it's basically the same program he outlined back in April of 2020. Borrowers who hold loans with the Department of Education and make less than $125,000 a year are eligible for up to $20,000 in student loan forgiveness if they received Pell Grants, which are given to students from low and middle income families. Individuals who make less than $125,000 a year but did not receive Pell Grants are eligible for $10,000 in loan forgiveness. Something not being talked about is, as a part of this program, the official end of the COVID student loan freeze was also announced, December 31st, 2022. After that, loan payments start coming due again. This info comes from the Politico article, How Biden Finally Got to Yes on Canceling Student Debt, and it reconfirms something that anybody intelligent should understand, but also that activists refuse to accept, that the government is a slow-moving bureaucracy. The president cannot simply will things into existence with the powers of the office. Trump learned that the hard way during his own tenure, and seems to be relearning it again with the whole "I said it's declassified so it is, procedure be damned" debacle. Presidents have agendas they want to pursue, but they also have to figure out if they're going to break something by just haphazardly tugging on the levers of power. Populists don't want to hear that. They don't care about the stability of institutions, they only care about achieving their desired end result. That's why whenever an institution delivers a result they don't like, whether it's Trump losing an election or Roe v. Wade being overturned, it can't be that they fairly lost the game. It's that the game must be rigged and needs to be changed so that they never lose again. The Politico article points out that throughout 2021, back when Nancy Pelosi was saying the president couldn't forgive student debt, that's actually what Biden's team thought at the time. White House attorneys were exploring legal avenues to actually get it done, and back then it seemed like it would be illegal for him to do. But by January 2022, they came back with a different verdict. It was in fact legally possible for President Biden to do so, and it's at this point that the Biden administration began to negotiate with other factions within the government to determine the appropriate amount of relief. Of course, conservatives online have fired back by pointing out exactly what kind of education that progs generally get, dissecting Taylor Swift lyrics, anti-capitalist feminist witchcraft, white supremacy culture workbooks, identifying literally anything good as toxic whiteness, degrees in feminist dance therapy, while an old meme still checks out. The stereotype of the broke barista who is failing to pay off a useless degree has at least some basis in reality. We could spend a whole video making fun of the wacky shit coming out of academia right now. In fact, maybe I'll do that another time. The point I'm making is, though, when conservatives ask, "This is what you want tax dollars to go towards forgiving?" that seems to be a reasonable criticism. These aren't engineering students with a run of bad luck, and would otherwise be indispensable to American civilization. These are people who went to school for a degree that didn't increase the value of their labor, and now that they've gone from valueless to valueless and in debt, they're feeling the pinch. Is that their fault? Well, kinda. They were 18. They did choose to go to school, and they're ultimately responsible for their lives. But unless you're a millennial, you don't know what it was like in the 2000s. The pressure for everybody to go to a degree mill, even if it meant going into debt, was extreme. We were all told that getting a degree meant a good job, and that a student loan was worth it. If I had it to do over again, I wouldn't have wasted my time, personally. And I didn't even have a loan to pay off. For me, it was a combination of help from my parents, working through school, and grants due to my high marks. So when somebody like Lauren Boebert comes out and says shit like this...
How the heck can Joe Biden call America First conservatives a threat to democracy with a straight face and a dry diaper? He's the one who has allowed millions to invade our southern border. He's the one who is robbing hardworking Americans to pay for Karen's daughter's degree in lesbian dance theory.
There's at least a hint of truth to it. However, I will say, lesbian dance theory might actually be profitable nowadays, in the age of TikTok dances. Of course, the progs would rather call her homophobic for the joke than address the actual issue. Is it good to forgive this debt? It's hard to miss the fact that the same people who object to student loan forgiveness are those who took advantage of PPP loan forgiveness. The PPP is the Paycheck Protection Program, a loan that businesses could take out to keep their workforce employed during the pandemic. Rather than lay off workers, businesses could keep them on, pay them with PPP money, and then pay it back after the pandemic's over. These loans were also forgiven, and leftoids are noticing the hypocrisy of many rightoids who oppose student loan forgiveness, while at the same time accepting PPP loan forgiveness. There is a little bit of difference though. While students were pressured into going into school, like I said, they could still say no in the end. But businesses were forced to close under threat of government action during the lockdowns. There was no choice to say no. Even if both groups might have a stick up their ass about their own superiority, these aren't exactly comparable situations. Lots of people are also saying that they object to student loan forgiveness because, well, they paid off their loans, so everyone else should have to as well. One person even confronted Elizabeth Warren with this very point back on the campaign trail when this was all just theoretical.
I just want to ask one question. My daughter's getting out of school. I've saved all my money. She doesn't have any student loans. Am I going to get my money back? Of course not. So you're going to pay for people who didn't save any money, and those of us that did the right thing get screwed.
No, it's not anybody got screwed. When we started,
of course we did. My buddy had fun, bought a car, went on vacations. I saved my money. He made more than I did. But I worked a double shift, worked extra. My daughter's worksheet is 10. So you're laughing. Yeah, that's exactly what you're doing. We did the right thing, and we get screwed.
I appreciate it.
That's all right.
Yeah, in case you didn't see it through the crowd, she laughed at him and ended the conversation. But it's a legitimate question. Why should people have their loans forgiven when others paid them off? And doesn't that mean that the more responsible people who ended up paying also end up paying for other people's loans through their own taxes? Leftoids like to make fun of this question by comparing student loans to cancer, and that might get a chuckle out of me. But I also know that this doesn't actually answer the question because cancer isn't student loans, believe it or not. Let's try to actually answer the question posed to Elizabeth Warren in this clip. In order to do so, we're going to have to dig into MMT a bit. That's modern monetary theory. I've spoken to both Econoboy and Friended about it before. I know MMT triggers the fuck out of my audience whenever I bring it up, so I gotta give you guys the trigger warning. What I'm about to say is descriptive only, not prescriptive. I'm not talking about what I want to be, I'm talking about what is. So please remember that before you fly off the handle in the comment section, okay? When the value of $1 is not pegged to the value of some physical object. When $1 doesn't represent some amount of gold, for example, and is instead printed by the government, that is fiat currency. In a fiat system, the government has a unique place in the market. It doesn't necessarily need to keep a balanced budget like a household or a business might. For private actors, they have income and expenses. Money goes in, money goes out. In the past, when we still used gold and silver coins, the government would operate in the same way. Money in, money out. The king's coffers would literally be a treasury of gold that could be spent on projects. But in a fiat system, the government doesn't play the game, the government is the referee of the game. In my video on Bidenflation, I described how, in a fiat system, the total amount of money is pegged to the total amount of production of the nation that prints it, and how, if you just print more money, each individual dollar is now worth less because the total pool of production hasn't actually changed. However, I also described that if you print money in such a way that it stimulates more production, the example I used in the video is giving a small businessman a grant to build a new productive business. Because both the money supply and the production supply go up, inflation doesn't happen. Therefore, printing money willy-nilly like in Sri Lanka or in Venezuela can destroy an economy. But printing money doesn't have to do that if you do it in a reserved, means-tested way. That is how the government is the referee of the game, not a player of it like you or I. The government has the power to determine how much production each dollar is worth. It can print money to make dollars worth less production, but it can also destroy money to make dollars worth more production. One of the reasons that both counterfeiting money and destroying money is a crime is because regulation of the total supply of dollars is something that government wants a monopoly over. When a private actor goes bankrupt, they've got no more money. They're out of resources, and unless given outside help, the institution collapses. But governments can literally just print money if they run out. Yes, that will inflate the dollar, and that sucks for everyone else because they'll lose some purchasing power. But before, the government had zero purchasing power, and now it has some purchasing power through the action of printing money. It's for this reason that conservatives like to point out that printing money is a wealth transfer from the people to the government, because the people lose purchasing power and the government gains it. This is true, but it's a bit simplistic. There's more to it than that. Let's say you decide to go down to the tax office in person and pay your taxes in physical money. After handing your cash over to the government employee, they might as well take it out back and burn it, because it doesn't matter anymore. It's not like the government is going to use those specific physical dollars to buy anything. In a fiat system, the government's role is to keep score of the money supply. When the government gives people money, they increase the money supply in the market. When the government taxes money back from the people, they decrease the money supply. As the referee of the game, the government isn't too concerned with balancing their own budget, leading to this famous gaffe.
To the person who is about to grab their car keys and go to the ATM and take out $3,000, you say what?
You don't need to. Your ATM is safe, your banks are safe, there's enough cash in the financial system, and there is an infinite amount of cash at the Federal Reserve. We will do whatever we need to do to make sure that there's enough cash in the banking system.
It's more accurate to say that the government doesn't need to secure an income source to balance its expenditures. It can borrow against the future by printing money, but that's a powerful tool that can utterly destroy an economy if it's used irresponsibly. In this way, taxation actually doesn't serve to fund the government. Taxation serves to remove money from the economy, lowering the money supply, thereby offsetting the effects of inflation that comes with printing money to fund the government. This is why Elizabeth Warren laughed at that guy, and why other leftoids are laughing at rightoids right now. They're technically correct in that taxes don't actually fund the government, and a rightoid who screams, "Stop spending my tax dollars," just sounds like a dumb hick. But a lot of them disengage their brain at that point of the conversation because they believe they can print that shit indefinitely, and that's just not the case. If you want your economy to survive, printing money and taxation are two knobs that have to be turned in tandem and kept in balance. That's what the leftoids don't understand. Like I said before, if the government has no purchasing power left, all it has to do is print money and give it to itself. The resulting inflation transfers purchasing power from the people to the government, and in order to balance the resulting inflation, the government can raise taxes on people to lower the money supply again. But that's not exactly what's happening with student loan forgiveness. It's the universities that hold the debt. If you go to a university and get a student loan, it's ultimately that university that is owed money. Let's say you take out a private loan to pay for your degree from a bank. The bank might pay the university what they're owed, but now the bank is owed money instead. None of the players involved here are the referee. They're all going to want to see that debt paid off directly. Now let's say you vanish off the face of the earth. Now there's no way for anyone to get their money back. The university and the bank are going to look at each other and be like, well, I'm owed something here. The university is not going to want to give the cash back, and the bank's going to want it back. At that point, it's just a game of who is left holding the bag. But if it's a government student loan, that's a whole different story. When you get a student loan from the government essentially prints money and pays the university with it. This causes some inflation, but the government is hoping that your increased productive capacity later in life as a result of that education will offset the inflation. If you can't pay off the debt, the university is in no danger of being hung out to dry because they're not dealing with another player, they're dealing with the referee. And when the government says, hey, you've got to pay back those student loans, what's actually happening there is the money you pay the government disappears from the economy, lowering the money supply, which helps to counter the inflation caused by your loan in the first place. However, if government student loans are forgiven, that's more money in the hands of people who took the loans. Great, the left says, but that's also more money that can be spent on other things instead. Great, the left says again. But if it's being spent on other things, that's more money in the economy and less money being removed from it to counter inflation. And that's not so great. We already know that inflation is a method by which purchasing power is siphoned around the economy. So, when the government is no longer shrinking the money supply due to student loan forgiveness, who is gaining and who is losing purchasing power? Well, the people who are gaining purchasing power are the people with the loans. That's why they can spend that money on other stuff instead of paying the government. The people who lose it seem to be people who save liquid money for a rainy day rather than holding assets. In other words, if your wealth is physical dollars or a number in a bank account, and not stocks or property or something like that, you're the one that is losing purchasing power when the government forgives student loans. For rich people, they don't care, because that number's already astronomically high. What does it matter to them if food costs a little bit more? But for poor people, who have only a few hundred in their account, and they gotta make it stretch for a month, seeing food prices go up is devastating. They're the ones who lose purchasing power, and the people who had their student loans forgiven get more. While the joke of useless degrees persists for a reason, compared to a high school dropout, on average, completing high school increases yearly earnings by 25%. Attending college increases it by a further 11%. Completing college increases that by a further 9%. Completing a university bachelor's increases that by a further 40%. A master's adds another 20%. A doctorate adds 25%. In total, your average doctorate earns 218% more than your average high school dropout per year, with a 1.1% unemployment rate compared to the high school dropout's 5.4%. In other words, the people who stand to benefit from Biden's student loan relief are middle-class educated white-collar workers, and the purchasing power that they siphon to themselves with this program is going to disproportionately affect lower-class, uneducated blue-collar workers. This is a wealth transfer to the middle class, and while some of that wealth is coming from the rich, enough of it is coming from the poor to seriously hurt them. Like, look at this person complaining about student loan interest and how out of touch conservatives are when they tell them to just stop buying Starbucks once a week. Fair enough, you won't actually save very much from not buying Starbucks, but you're also a medical doctor. You're going to be in the top 1% of society's earners over the course of your lifetime. And here you are whining that you need the feds to forgive your student loans, a program which will be paid for by the labor of people who will make a whole lot less than you. This is insanity. Add to that the fact that these people don't seem to know how to hold on to their money. How the fuck are you earning $250,000 a year and still living paycheck to paycheck? This is half of all millennials. What the fuck are you guys buying? Cocaine? I never thought I'd say this, but this unironically seems like entitled millennials wanting to get their way because society and the system are to blame for the collapsed ruin that is their life. And it's the people who are just keeping on working and getting by that are paying for it. So when that working class dude was yelling at Elizabeth Warren, he's not wrong exactly. It's not that person A didn't get a break and person B did and they're jealous. It's that person B's break is ultimately going to be funded by person A. Not directly, not with physical tax dollars, but through the inflation that will siphon purchasing power from person A's paltry savings into the government, and then the government will use that purchasing power to benefit person B. When you look at it like that, Lauren Boebert's earlier comments don't sound so crazy after all. She's too dumb to understand why she's correct, I think, but she's still correct. The problem with Biden's student loan forgiveness isn't that people got useless degrees and they're crying about needing a bailout, even if that might be kinda true. It's not that people are jealous that they didn't get relief and now somebody else did, and that doesn't seem fair, even if that's kinda true too. I don't really care about that stuff. The real problem with it is that we're already in a time when inflation is running wild, and we need to be taking steps to solve the problem, not exacerbate it. Student loan forgiveness, at least right now, exacerbates the inflation problem in a way that disproportionately helps middle-class educated progressives at the expense of our most vulnerable population, the very same working class that progressives claim to support.